This is Appalachian Television Omnimedia, improving America. 3:04, local Wasteland time. If you're listening, it means the night is still moving, even when the world says it shouldn't. Before the story, a quick truth. Outside the signal. I don't speak Spanish very well. Not fluently. Not the way a man should. Especially if he's trying to understand without bruising the meaning. Some nights, I can carry a sentence. Some nights, I drop it. But I keep doing the Spanish podcasts anyway, because I started realizing something I didn't like. People were hearing my voice, but they weren't getting the whole signal. So I practiced. Old school pages. Damaged books. Words in the margins left by people who didn't get to finish anything anymore. And after a few of those broadcasts, a voice answered back. Not a traveler. Not a tape. A signal. Mexico City. He called himself Xicohténcatl. We didn't talk like friends. We talked like two men on opposite sides of a dead continent, checking to see if the other one is real. He told me what I already knew. There's a wasteland down there too. Different streets, different ruins, same hunger, same grief, same human problems, wearing new clothes. Sometimes he sends me a story. A story has been carried to him by traders, by caravan people, by the ones who still move. I pass it on the same way. The same way I pass on anything out here. Quiet and straight. This one comes from the hills near Zacatecas. It's called The Dead Train to Zacatecas. They say the rail lines died early. Not rusted and abandoned over time. Died. War doesn't politely retire infrastructure. It breaks it. Bridges snapped. Switch yards burned. Tracks buckled in the heat. Power stations went dark and stayed dark. Most settlements along the route collapsed into smaller things. A handful of rooms with a tarp roof. A market that only exists on certain days. A water spot guarded like a secret. So when people started talking about a commuter train still running through the hills, nobody called it a miracle. They called it a problem. Because out here, anything that still works without explanation usually has teeth somewhere. Xicohténcatl told me about the train. The same way you hear about anything that doesn't feel safe. Not as a rumor, as advice. A mule driver told him, if you see the fog on the old line, don't camp near the track. A scav told him, if you hear a whistle after midnight, stay inside. Not fear, instruction. But then he heard a different kind of talk. Not warnings, questions. A woman moving between the hill markets, asking about timetables that shouldn't exist anymore. Asking about station names that went to ash. Asking, quiet and steady, as if she was trying to prove the world still had a schedule. Her name was Marta Ávila. She wasn't a raider, wasn't a preacher. One of those people who collects myths, like their currency. She carried a little notebook tied with a wire, and she wrote down everything she heard, like the truth could be assembled from scraps. They told Xicohténcatl she'd grown up outside of Zacatecas, in one of those hillside clusters, where the roofs are tin and the water comes in when it feels like it. Her mother vanished during the early days, during an evacuation attempt, when people still believed out of town meant out of danger. No body, no grave, just absence. And Marta grew up with that kind of absence, the kind that doesn't close, the kind that keeps asking questions, even when you try to put it down. So when she heard that the train was still running, she didn't call it a ghost. She didn't call it a blessing. She called it a lead. Some people told her she was chasing a ghost. She told them, flat and practical, I'm just trying to find a timetable. She started walking the old line. Not the way the map shows it. The maps are lies now. They still draw tracks where the earth is split. She followed what was left. A length of rail poking out of the weeds, like a bone. A line of gravel that still had the shape of purpose. A station sign half buried in the mud, with the leathers eaten away by all the years. She slept in the dry culverts. She traded information with her last clean bandage. She listened the way the people listen when they can't afford to be wrong. And everywhere she went, the same rules surfaced. Not spoken like superstition. Spoken like it had been paid for. Fog nights. No camping near the track. If the fog comes in down heavy and gray, you get inside. You shut up. You wait for morning. Marta wrote it down anyway. Then she kept walking. A week into her walk, she found the ruins of a switchyard, blackened, like a throat after a fire. The metal there had been hot once, hot enough to sag, hot enough to forget its shape. She found a timetable board on the ground. Not the paper, the frame. And in the corner of the frame, still bolted on, a little metal plate with stamped numbers. Not a destination, not a slogan. Just a line designation and a service code. She rubbed it with her thumb, the way you rub a coin to see if it's real. Then she looked down at the dead track and waited. Nothing came, but later that night, a sound moved through the hills, so faint it could have been wind. A whistle. One note. Long. Tired. Like something remembering how to announce itself. Marta wrote that down too. 3 weeks later, after the bridge that had snapped into the ravine, after the hillside station where the platform was now a garden of thorns, after the settlement that only spoke about the train once the lamps were low, Marta finally saw it. Not up close. Not yet. From a ridge line, through a veil of fog that made the world look unfinished, she saw a headlight. Dim. Not bright. Not clean. Just a dull circle, pushing forward, as if it had been told to. The train came along with no drama, no screaming metal, no thunder, just steady. A long shape sliding through the gray. Its steel body stained the color of old rain. And the strangest part, the part that she wrote 3 times in her notebook, as if repetition could make it make sense, was that it moved, like it still believed it was on a schedule. Marta followed it at a distance. Not along the track, along the slope, keeping the line in sight, the way you keep a dangerous animal in sight, so you don't surprise it. It slowed at a station that no longer existed, a platform that was mostly weeds, and a signpost snapped in half. A ticket booth collapsed inward like a skull, and still, the train slowed. The doors opened. Marta watched the seam of the door part with a smooth mechanical patience that didn't belong in a world like this. The air that spilled out didn't look like air. It looked old, not smoky. Old, like a breath that had been trapped and had nowhere to go. Through the windows, she saw the passengers, seated upright, dressed in their best clothes, like they were going to mass, or to a wedding, or to meet relatives that they did not want to disappoint. A man with a pressed shirt, a woman with a scarf folded carefully at the neck, a teenager with a book, still open to the same page, a lunch pail on the floor by someone's shoes. No movement, No conversation. Just bodies. They were posed by habit and held in place by a system that never learned how to stop. Marta wrote one sentence in her notebook. She wrote it so hard the page slightly tore. They looked like they're waiting to arrive. Then she saw the engineer, a Mr. Handy. Paint long gone. Chassis scratched down to the metal. One manipulator arm missing at the joint, like someone tried to salvage him and then changed their mind. His nameplate was still bolted to his front housing. Though the letters were worn, it read, Don Silencio. He hovered at the front like a priest at a pulpit. He made announcements in a voice. He still tried to sound cheerful, still tried to sound professional, still tried to pretend the civility survived. Próxima estación. Next stop. And then he named places that no longer existed. Towns that were ash. Platforms that were weeds. Stations that had collapsed inward years ago. He waited anyway. Doors open. Pause. Doors close. Then the train rolled forward again. As if the pause had just been honored. As if a mother with a child had climbed aboard. As if an old man had taken his time. Marta watched it disappear into the fog. It felt something that she didn't have a word for. Not fear. Recognition. Like something had been confirmed that she had already suspected. Her mother's story didn't end cleanly. It ended inside of a machine. Xicohténcatl said Marta could have stopped there. Most people would have. You see something like that once, and you learn the lesson the hills are offering you. But Marta didn't walk the line to learn a lesson. She walked it to confirm a name. She did what she did because grief does what it does, especially when it puts on a practical face. She planned. She asked where the train slowed the most, where the fog always pooled, where the platform was still intact enough to stand on it without breaking an ankle. She traded for a candle, a real one, with a wick braided tight, and she carried, wrapped in cloth, a small photograph, the kind of pre-war thing people guard like medicine. Her mother is in the picture, hair pinned back, a scarf at the neck, not the same scarf Marta had seen through the window before, but close enough to make the air feel thinner. The fog rolled in 3 nights later. Thick. Low. The kind of fog that makes distance feel like a lie. Marta went to the platform. She didn't build a fire. She didn't call out. She didn't whistle back. She just stood there, with the candle unlit, waiting. And then she heard it. One note. Long, tired, the whistle. The headlight arrived like a thought, dim and patient. The train slid into the station, as if the station still had a name and a purpose. It slowed. The doors opened, and Don Silencio's voice came through the fog, bright, polished, almost kind. Próxima estación. Marta stepped forward. One step, and then another. She lit the candle, not as an offering, not as a prayer, as proof. I'm here, the flame said, but without words. Marta climbed 1 step onto the train. Just one. And Don Silencio turned his head unit slightly. Not aggressive. Attentive. Like a host noticing a late guest. Like the system had finally found a living variable again. And in that bright server's voice he said, Bienvenido a bordo. Welcome aboard. Xicohténcatl told me the story pauses here, because the people who survived it weren't inside the train. They were watching from a distance, the way you watch lightning hit the same tree twice and decide, You don't need to be any closer. A scab down the line said he saw Marta's candlelight. For a moment, inside the doorway. Then the light vanished as the doors closed. The train waited its patient count, and then it rolled forward again into the fog that swallowed sound and swallowed certainty. Marta didn't scream. Marta didn't run. Marta simply stopped being seen. The next day, they found her camp, her blanket, her tin cup, her notebook. The notebook was open to a page where she had drawn a crude map of the route and written station names in careful block letters, like she didn't trust cursive to survive the years. And on the last line of the page, one sentence, unfinished. If I can see her, even once, then no signature, no goodbye. Just a thought that didn't make it to the end of the line. A week later, another traveler swore he saw something new through the window in one of the cars. A woman seated amongst the passengers, pressed shirt, candle in her lap. Not lit, but held carefully, like it still mattered. And the woman was seated one row closer to the front than the others. That's all he said. He didn't claim it was Marta. He didn't claim it was her mother. He just said the train looked fuller, in a way that made his stomach drop. And he never camped near the track again. This isn't a ghost story. It's an automation story. That's what happens when the world ends. And the system doesn't receive the update. A machine doesn't need a reason. A machine needs a loop. And when the human layer dies, the layer that calls it off, that reroutes, that says enough, all you have left is instruction. Run the route, open the doors, wait, close the doors, continue. That's what sticks with me, because the wasteland is full of violence you can name. Raiders, mutants, predators. But this is different. This is a tragedy made of procedure. A reminder that sometimes the worst thing in the world isn't cruelty. It's momentum. Some trains don't run on coal or batteries. They run on grief, on unanswered departures, on one more name that never reaches the end of the line. Thank you to Xicohténcatl for sending this one north and trusting me to carry it the rest of the way. You've been listening to Midnight in the Wasteland. I'm Nightwatch, and I'll be back tomorrow if the quiet stays kind. Until then, if you hear a whistle in the fog, don't romanticize it. Don't chase it. Some loops don't care who you are. They only care that you stepped onto the track.